My name's Brad, and I guess I've always been that nice guy. You know the type, loyal, dependable, tries to see the best in people. That's probably why I never saw it coming, or maybe I just didn't want to. I've been married to Katie for 6 years. At least, I was married to her. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from day one, Katie had this way of lighting up a room. She was magnetic, all sharp wit and dazzling smiles. I fell hard and fast, and for a while, life felt like one of those sappy rom-coms. We got married after a whirlwind year of dating, and things were good, great, even. Or so I thought. Lately, though, something's been off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Katie started working later than usual. She'd claim it was some big project at work, but when I'd ask about it, her explanations were vague, evasive even. I chalked it up to stress. Everyone has rough patches, right? But then, the late nights turned into weekend strategy meetings, and texts she'd quickly hide when I walked into the room. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. She was my wife, my partner. She wouldn't lie to me. Or so I kept telling myself. Last weekend, my best friend, Mark, got married. It was supposed to be this beautiful celebration, a rustic outdoor wedding at a vineyard followed by a small reception. Katie and I had been invited, and I was actually looking forward to it. It felt like a chance for us to reconnect, to rekindle whatever we seemed to have lost lately. We arrived at the wedding in style. Mark had arranged for a limo to shuttle the wedding party and a few close friends, including us, from the ceremony to the reception venue. Katie looked stunning in a deep red dress, her smile as radiant as the day we met. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was fine. But then, during the ceremony, Katie kept sneaking glances at her phone. When I whispered, "Everything okay?" she waved me off, mumbling something about work emails. It didn't sit right, but I didn't want to cause a scene. The ceremony ended, and we all piled into the limo. It was supposed to be a short drive, but the laughter and champagne stretched it into a mini-party. I sat next to Katie, trying to enjoy the moment, but she seemed distracted. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't even try to hide it. I caught a glimpse of the name flashing on her screen, Chris, work. Here's where things took a turn. The limo hit a bump, and her phone slipped out of her hand, landing right between us. Instinctively, I picked it up to hand it back. But the screen was still lit. And there it was, a text from Chris that read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I could kiss you right now." My stomach dropped. The world tilted on its axis. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I turned to Katie, my voice trembling, "What the hell is this?" Her eyes widened in panic. She snatched the phone back, fumbling for words. "It's not what it looks like, Brad." But it was exactly what it looked like. The rest of the limo ride was a blur. I demanded answers, but Katie deflected with the kind of lies that only made her look guiltier. "Chris is just a colleague," she insisted. "We're working on a big account together. It's harmless." "Harmless?" I hissed. "You don't text a coworker like that, Katie. You don't wish you could kiss them." The other passengers were starting to notice. Mark's younger brother gave me a concerned glance, but no one said anything. Katie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Can we talk about this later? Please." "No, we can't," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "Because I deserve the truth, Katie." "Who is he?" Her face flushed red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth. Chris is someone who actually makes me feel alive. You've been so predictable, Brad. Boring." Her words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't even speak. As soon as the limo stopped, Katie bolted out, leaving me stunned and humiliated. One of the bridesmaids came up to me, asking if I was okay. I wasn't. I excused myself, walking away from the crowd to get some air. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? Was it my fault? Had I really been so blind? Katie avoided me for the rest of the night, which was fine by me. I needed space to process what had just happened. But one thing was clear, my marriage was over. The wedding reception might as well have been happening on another planet. While the crowd danced under twinkling fairy lights and toasted to Mark and his bride's new beginning, I was grappling with the brutal ending of my own marriage. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and ripped out my heart, leaving nothing but a gaping void. Katie had vanished as soon as we got to the venue. Probably texting Chris or figuring out how to spin this whole mess to make me the villain. Meanwhile, I was stuck trying to keep myself from completely breaking down in front of friends and strangers alike. Mark found me leaning against a wooden railing behind the venue, staring out at the vineyards under the moonlight. He was still in his tux, his tie loosened and a drink in hand. "Brad?" he asked softly. "You okay, man? You disappeared after the limo." I turned to face him, trying to force a smile, but I could feel my face betraying me. "Katie's cheating on me," I blurted out. Mark froze, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite process what I'd said. Finally, he set his drink down and stepped closer. "What? Are you sure?" I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'm sure. Saw the texts with my own eyes. She's been having an affair with some guy named Chris. Probably laughing at me behind my back while she plans her next work trip." Mark cursed under his breath, shaking his head. "I don't even know what to say. I mean, you two always seemed solid." "Yeah, so did the Titanic," I said, my voice cracking. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Look, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear right now, but you deserve better than this, Brad. Katie, she's not worth it. And if there's anything I can do—" "Thanks," I said quickly, cutting him off. I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't ready for the pep talks. Not yet. I couldn't let it end with her running away. I needed to hear her admit it. I needed the truth, even if it gutted me. It wasn't hard to find Katie. She was hiding in the bridal suite, probably thinking no one would look for her there. When I opened the door, she was sitting on the edge of a couch, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard me, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "Brad, please, can we not do this here?" she said, her voice low and trembling. "Oh, we're doing this now," I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. "No more excuses, no more lies. Who the hell is Chris, and how long has this been going on?" Katie sighed and stood, crossing her arms. "I told you in the limo, it's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me, Katie. I saw the texts. I know. So stop lying and just tell me the truth for once in your life." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Fine," she said. "You want the truth. Chris and I have been seeing each other for a few months. It started out as, I don't know, a distraction. Someone to talk to. And then it just happened. Just happened. You just happened to betray your husband." I was shouting now, my fists clenched at my sides. "Do you even realize what you've done? Or do you not care?" "Of course I care," she shouted back. "But what was I supposed to do, Brad? Pretend everything was fine while I was suffocating? You don't get it, you never listen to me." I stared at her, stunned. "I don't listen. Katie, I've done nothing but try to make you happy. I've supported you, I've trusted you, I've loved you. And this is how you repay me? By sneaking around behind my back and blaming me for it?" She flinched but didn't back down. "You think love is enough? You think just being a nice guy makes you a good husband? Newsflash, Brad, it doesn't. You're so busy being predictable and boring and safe that you don't even see me anymore. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You mean I didn't see the selfish, lying person you've apparently been all along? You're right, Katie. I didn't see that. But I sure as hell do now. She didn't say anything after that. Just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, looking anywhere but at me. I waited for her to say something, to apologize, to explain, to beg, but she stayed silent. Finally, I turned and walked out. The rest of the night was a blur. I went back to the reception, had a few too many drinks, and crashed on Mark's couch instead of going home. I couldn't face Katie, not yet. The morning after. When I finally walked into our house the next morning, Katie was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept, her makeup from the night before smudged and her hair a mess. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "No, Katie," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "You need to pack your things and get out. I'm done." She blinked, clearly not expecting me to be so decisive. "Brad, wait." "No," I said, my voice firm. I waited. I waited while you lied to me, while you betrayed me, while you let someone else into our marriage. And for what? So you could tell me it's my fault you're unhappy. I'm done being the guy you blame for your own choices. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. "I'll stay with my sister," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But Brad, can we at least try to work this out? For us? For everything we've built?" I laughed bitterly. "What we've built? Katie, you burned it to the ground. There's nothing left to save." Reflection. As I watched her leave, suitcase in hand, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The pain was still there, raw and heavy, but so was the certainty that I was doing the right thing. I'd spent years trying to build a life with someone who clearly didn't value it the way I did. And yeah, it hurt like hell to lose the person I thought I'd grow old with. But I realized something that night: I'd rather be alone than be with someone who made me feel invisible. I've spent the last week sorting through the wreckage of my life, trying to figure out what comes next. I'm not going to lie, it's been brutal. You think you know someone, that you've built this unshakable life together, only to watch it crumble in the blink of an eye. But I guess betrayal has a way of exposing the cracks you didn't even know were there. After Katie moved out, the house felt emptier than I'd ever imagined. Every corner held a memory of her, her favorite coffee mug still in the cabinet, her perfume lingering in the bedroom. I considered packing up her things and dumping them on her sister's porch, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. It wasn't about holding on to her, it was about holding on to the life I thought we had. The first few days after Katie left were surreal. Friends and family started reaching out, their voices dripping with that awful mix of sympathy and pity. Mark, of course, had already told a few people what happened. He meant well, but it opened the floodgates. "I can't believe Katie would do this," my sister, Lauren, said over the phone. "She always seemed so devoted to you." "Yeah, well, appearances can be deceiving," I muttered, staring at the wedding photo I'd taken down but hadn't yet thrown away. My mom tried to comfort me the only way she knew how, with casseroles and unsolicited advice. "You'll bounce back," she said as she set a tray of lasagna on my counter. "You're better off without her." I nodded, though her words felt hollow. Better off? Maybe. But right now, it didn't feel that way. A few days later, Katie texted me, "Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it. What was there to say? She made her choices, and I was done. But curiosity, and maybe a lingering thread of hope, got the better of me. We met at a small coffee shop, neutral territory. She looked different. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced with something more subdued, almost fragile. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to make you feel better, Katie," I said, keeping my tone even. "So, what do you want?" She fidgeted with her coffee cup, her eyes avoiding mine. I wanted to apologize. For everything." I raised an eyebrow. "For everything? You're going to have to be more specific." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. "I messed up, Brad. I let myself get caught up in something I didn't know how to stop. And I hurt you in ways I can never take back. For what it's worth," she continued, "Chris is out of the picture. It was a mistake. He doesn't mean anything to me." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so it's over with Chris? Guess that makes it all okay then, huh?" Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. "Look, Katie, I'm glad you're finally admitting what you did, but it doesn't change the fact that you destroyed our marriage. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. And that's not something I can just forgive and forget." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. I wanted to try to make amends. But as I walked out of that coffee shop, I realized something: her apology wasn't for me. It was for her. To ease her guilt. To convince herself she wasn't a monster. And I wasn't going to let her use me for that. In the days that followed, something strange started to happen. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering their support. Even some of Katie's friends, people I thought would side with her, sent me messages saying how sorry they were and how shocked they felt. One message, in particular, stood out. It was from Emily, one of Katie's closest friends. "Hey Brad, I just heard about everything. I don't know if this is my place, but I thought you should know that Katie's been acting off for months. She never told me about Chris, but looking back, there were signs. I'm so sorry you're going through this." Emily's message hit me harder than I expected. Not because of what she said, but because it validated what I'd been feeling for so long, that I wasn't crazy. That the distance I felt from Katie wasn't just in my head. One night, I decided to start cleaning out the house. It was painful, going through the remnants of a life I'd built with someone who had betrayed me. But it was also cathartic. In the back of our closet, I found a shoebox filled with old photos, notes, and little trinkets from our early days together. It reminded me of the Katie I used to know, the one I fell in love with. And for the first time, I allowed myself to mourn that version of her. But I also knew that person was gone. That night, I deleted every photo of us from my phone, packed up the wedding album, and put it in a box with the rest of her things. I wasn't going to let her haunt me anymore. I'd be lying if I said I've completely moved on. Healing isn't a straight path, it's messy and painful, full of setbacks and sleepless nights. But I'm learning to find joy in the little things again. Mark and a few of my other friends have been dragging me out of the house, forcing me to remember what it feels like to laugh and have fun. My sister checks in almost daily, and my mom, well, let's just say I've never eaten so much lasagna in my life. I've started seeing a therapist, too. At first, it felt weird to spill my guts to a stranger, but it's helping. Slowly but surely, I'm figuring out who I am outside of my marriage. It's been a few weeks since I last posted, and I wanted to give you an update. A lot has happened since Katie moved out, and while things are still messy, I feel like I'm finally starting to reclaim my life. The divorce process is officially underway. My lawyer, a sharp and relentless guy named Jack, has been handling everything. When I told him about the affair, he didn't sugarcoat things. "Brad, infidelity doesn't always sway the courts like it used to," he said during our first meeting. "But with the texts and the timeline, we've got enough leverage to make this work in your favor." Leverage. That word felt strange to me, like I was suddenly playing a game I didn't sign up for. But if there was one thing I was sure of, it was that I wasn't going to let Katie walk away from this unscathed. Katie, for her part, seemed eager to settle things quickly. She even suggested mediation, but Jack advised against it. She's trying to minimize the fallout, he said. Don't give her the chance to control the narrative. I agreed. For once, I wasn't going to let Katie dictate the terms. A week after the papers were served, I got a call from Emily, Katie's friend. She hesitated for a moment before dropping a bombshell. Chris wasn't just some random guy from work. He was married. My God, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Does his wife know? She does now, Emily said quietly. She found out around the same time you did. Apparently, she saw the texts too. The revelation was both shocking and strangely vindicating. Katie wasn't just reckless, she was destructive. And now, her actions had rippled out, hurting even more people. I reached out to Chris's wife, Amanda, not to commiserate, but because I wanted to make sure she had all the information. She was surprisingly kind, given the circumstances. Brad, she said over the phone, her voice weary, I'm sorry you had to go through this. Chris, he's a liar. I don't know why I stayed as long as I did. We talked for over an hour, sharing stories and piecing together the timeline of their affair. By the end of the call, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. We were both victims of their selfishness, and somehow, that made me feel less alone. Once the initial shock wore off, I realized I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my broken marriage. It was time to rebuild. First, I made a list of everything I wanted to change about my life. Some were small, repainting the bedroom, rearranging the furniture. Others were bigger, like joining a local running group and finally taking that woodworking class I'd always talked about. The changes weren't just about keeping busy, they were about reclaiming my identity. For too long, I'd defined myself as Katie's husband. Now, I was learning to define myself as Brad. One evening, as I was sanding down an old coffee table in my garage, Katie showed up unannounced. She looked tired, her usually polished appearance replaced with something far more raw. I'm not here to fight, she said, holding up her hands as if to ward off an attack. Then why are you here? I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the garage like she was looking for answers in the sawdust and half-finished projects. I wanted to see how you're doing. I set down the sandpaper and crossed my arms. I'm doing fine, Katie. Better, actually. What do you want? Her shoulders slumped. I wanted to apologize again. And to say that I miss. Don't, I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. Don't come here and pretend like we can go back to how things were. You made your choices, Katie. Now you have to live with them. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I know. I'm sorry, Brad. For everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She lingered for a moment before finally turning and walking away. As painful as that encounter was, it marked a turning point for me. For the first time, I felt like I was truly letting go of Katie. I started spending more time with friends, accepting invitations I would have turned down before. Mark and his wife invited me over for dinner, and while it was hard not to feel like the third wheel, it was good to be around people who cared about me. I also started reconnecting with hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. Photography, for one. I dusted off my old camera and began exploring the city, capturing moments that felt like tiny bursts of beauty in an otherwise chaotic world. And then there was Sarah. Sarah was a friend of Mark's wife, someone I'd met briefly at their wedding but hadn't thought much about. She was funny, confident, and completely unpretentious, a breath of fresh air. We ran into each other at a local farmer's market, and before I knew it, we were sitting at a nearby cafe, talking like old friends. I heard about what happened, she said gently. Mark mentioned it. I'm sorry, Brad. That's awful. Yeah, I said, stirring my coffee. But, you know, life goes on. She smiled. It does. And for what it's worth, you seem like the kind of guy who deserves better. Her words stuck with me long after we said goodbye. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was life after Katie. The divorce was finalized last week. It's strange to say, but I didn't feel sad when I signed the papers. If anything, I felt relieved. Like I was finally cutting the last thread that had tied me to a version of my life I no longer recognized. Katie tried to negotiate for more time with the house, claiming she needed stability, but my lawyer wasn't having it. We kept the split fair. She took some furniture, her car, and a few other things, but the house stayed with me. It was a small victory, but one that felt monumental. More importantly, I got to keep my dignity. Katie never fought back hard because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. I think deep down, even she knew that what she did was unforgivable. One of the hardest parts about moving forward was confronting the memories of our life together. There were nights when I'd find myself staring at old photos or rereading texts from happier times, wondering where it all went wrong. But every time those feelings crept in, I reminded myself of one simple truth: the Katie I missed didn't exist anymore. I started getting rid of the things that held me back. The wedding album. Gone. Her clothes that she hadn't bothered to take with her. Donated. The cheesy anniversary cards I used to cherish. Shredded. Each act of purging felt like shedding an old skin, like I was making room for something new. Life has a funny way of testing you when you least expect it. About a month ago, I ran into Katie at a grocery store. She looked different, smaller, somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. "Brad," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. I considered walking past her, pretending I didn't see her, but something made me stop. Maybe I needed to hear her out one last time. "Hi, Katie," I said, keeping my tone neutral. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before she spoke. "How have you been?" "Better," I said truthfully. "And you?" She hesitated. "I'm figuring things out. Chris and I didn't work out, in case you were wondering." I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. "Listen," she said, her voice trembling, "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain. I just felt indifferent. "I already have," I said simply. Her eyes widened. "You have?" "Yeah," I said. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to all that anger, it's exhausting. I've let it go, Katie. And I hope you find a way to let it go too." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Brad. That means more than you know." I gave her a small smile and walked away. That was the last time I saw her, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Since the divorce, I've made it a point to focus on myself. I threw myself into my woodworking projects, transforming my garage into a full-fledged workshop. What started as a hobby has turned into a side business. I've been selling custom furniture to friends and neighbors, and the orders keep coming in. The running group I joined has been another lifeline. There's something about pounding the pavement, mile after mile, that clears your head in a way nothing else can. It's given me a sense of accomplishment and a community of people who don't care about my past, only the progress I'm making now. And then there's Sarah. After our coffee shop conversation, Sarah and I started spending more time together. At first, it was just as friends, grabbing lunch, going to local events, things like that. But over time, something shifted. Sarah is unlike anyone I've ever met. She's funny, smart, and fiercely independent. She challenges me in ways I didn't know I needed, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building something real. We're taking things slow, no labels, no expectations, just enjoying each other's company. And honestly, that feels perfect. Looking back, I've realized that Katie's betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to grow in ways I never would have otherwise. It taught me to value myself, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my happiness. Here are a few lessons I've learned along the way. 1. Trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Those little warning signs are there for a reason. 2. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. I spent years trying to be everything Katie needed, only to realize she didn't value what I brought to the table. 3. Healing takes time. There's no shortcut to getting over a betrayal like this. Some days will be harder than others, and that's okay. 4. Happiness is a choice. For so long, I let my happiness depend on someone else. Now, I'm learning to create it for myself. As I write this, I'm sitting on my back porch, sipping a beer and watching the sunset. The house feels different now, lighter, somehow. It's no longer a place filled with memories of a broken marriage. It's my home, my sanctuary. For anyone out there who's struggling, I want you to know that it does get better. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. You'll find your footing again. You'll rediscover who you are. And when you do, you'll realize that you were stronger than you ever gave yourself credit for. Thanks for being here for me, Reddit. Sharing my story has been therapeutic in ways I didn't expect. This chapter of my life is over, but I'm excited to see what the next one holds. Take care, and remember, sometimes, the hardest endings lead to the best beginnings.